Good morning from New York. I'm Steve Kornacki in for Chris Hayes. Right now, joining me today, we have Cay Johnston. He's the author of The Fine Print, How Big Companies Use Plain English to Rob You Blind. He's formerly a Pulitzer Prize-winning tax reporter at the New York Times and now a distinguished visiting lecturer at the Syracuse University College of Law. We also have Neera Tanden, president and CEO of the Center for American Progress, who served in both the Obama and Clinton administrations and is policy director of Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. We have Laura Flanders, founder of GritTV.org, and MSNBC political analyst Joan Walsh, the editor-at-large of Salon.com, and in full disclosure, the woman who hired me at Salon about 2 years ago now. So thanks, as always, for that, Joan.
Of course.
This isn't a progress report because there's no progress to report. 4 days ago, we offered a serious proposal based on testimony of President Clinton's former chief of staff. Since then, there's been no counteroffer from the White House. Instead, reports indicate that the president has adopted a deliberate strategy to slow walk our economy right to the edge of the fiscal cliff.
So Ezra Klein in the Washington Post made a point, I think on Friday, where he basically said, you've got two tracks here. You've got the public posturing, you've got comments like that from Obama, you've got comments like that from Boehner, but you also have, he says, inside Washington, sort of behind closed doors, he thinks the foundation of a deal may be shaping up right now. And what he laid out, and I think Ezra's a pretty reliable guy in this stuff because he's pretty plugged into the administration, what he laid out was a deal where Republicans would give in on tax rates, but not to the 39.6% top level that Obama's been demanding, maybe the 37%, about halfway. In exchange for that, he's saying the White House would give in something on entitlements on Medicare, specifically, potentially at least, on the retirement, on the Medicare eligibility age, raising that by 2 years. David, if that's the framework, what is your response to something like that?
This is a total betrayal of the people who voted for Obama if they do that, which is raising the Medicare age. That's a terrible thing to do. It doesn't save money. It probably costs money. And for people who don't have office jobs like we do, it's a death sentence for some of them. This is just awful. Obama won by 5 million votes.
Mitt Romney didn't even run on raising the eligibility age, let alone President Obama. Nobody ran on that because it's A, political poison, and B, a terrible idea for all the reasons that David stated.
I'd just like to talk about specifically why raising the Medicare age is a very bad idea, just to build on what David said. First of all, really what it is just a shift of cost from the federal government to employers, seniors, and states. And in fact, because Medicare is cheaper per beneficiary, it's actually increasing costs. So a president who ran on lowering national health care costs, that was one of the reasons why we have the Affordable Care Act. If he does this, it's actually going to increase the costs for everybody, will raise national health expenditures, and will cut out hundreds of thousands of seniors. And those seniors are the hardest to insure. So you're actually raising costs of the Medicare program. You're shifting costs to employers because they're going to have to cover some of these people. And it's actually making us less competitive. And I don't actually understand why.
Well, here's what they're saying. What the signal the White House and sort of its I guess allies on this front would be sending out there is that they say there's, I think Jonathan Chait wrote this, there's important symbolic value as they see it politically. But right.
I also really need to say about Jonathan Chait's piece, I mean, I am a liberal, but his argument is the worst example of liberal social engineering I've ever heard. He's basically saying, take people out of a popular, and I hope this is not the White House position, take people out of a popular program that works and that they love, put them into Obamacare, which is not so popular yet, which they don't necessarily love, take away something they like and give them something liberals think they should like. If I've ever heard that, that's a
I want to bring in Avik Roy. He's a former member of Mitt Romney's Healthcare Policy Advisory Group. He's a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute and the author of The Apothecary, Forbes blog on healthcare and entitlement reform. And Avik, I want to ask you about that piece of it. We have been talking about this potential deal at 37% for the top marginal tax rate. Do you see any scenario where Republicans would actually vote for that in Congress?
Well, first of all, I've got to respond to this interesting hyperbole about Medicare death sentences. I mean, we have to remember that if you raise the retirement age for Medicare, we now have the Affordable Care Act as a backstop, right? So everybody under 400% of federal poverty level is still covered with the Affordable Care Act in place. So what we're really talking about here is actually means testing Medicare, in effect, by raising the retirement age, because people who are upper income above 400% of the poverty level won't necessarily be subsidized if they're younger retirees. And that's where entitlement reform should go, is it should be to expand the Affordable Care Act into the retiree population.
Well, we might be able to get into this a little later. I want to stick to the tax thing, but I would just make the point on Medicare. You say we have Obamacare in place. Well, one issue there is we don't have Obamacare in place right now, and I think we're going to talk about this a little later. States have to set up these exchanges, and there are lots of states out there right now refusing to do it. They have to expand Medicaid eligibility. Hasn't been done yet, but we can get to that later. But I want to ask you about this tax piece, because, again, it's been more than 2 decades since a single Republican in Congress has said, hey, I am willing to vote for a tax increase. Even if we had the deal along these parameters, Republicans would have to do that. Can you see that happening?
Well, I mean, Speaker Boehner has said that he's willing to raise revenue. His favored method, of course, is to simplify the tax code by eliminating some of the deductions that really wealthy people take advantage of. President Obama, of course, is less interested in simplifying the tax code. His main emphasis is raising rates. So that's been the debate, and, Republicans may or may not concede on that, but as you said, they don't have a lot of leverage, because if they do nothing, if no law passes, then we go over the fiscal cliff.
Congress will push me to raise taxes, and I'll say no, and they'll push, and I'll say no, and they'll push again, and I'll say to them, read my lips, no new taxes.
Avik, I'll come back to you on this, because this is a question I've been looking for an answer for a Republican for 20 years. How do you reckon with what happened when Bill Clinton raised taxes to 39.6 and all the job growth in the 1990s and the deficit reduction?
Yeah, so there's a lot of points to make about that, right? So first of all, we don't have Clinton levels of spending, and that's the biggest problem here. We have Obama levels of spending, and if we're going to pay for Obama levels of spending, as some intellectually honest Democrats are admitting, taxes have to go up not just on the top 2%. They have to go up on everybody, right? So during the Bush years, from 2000 to 2007, the top 2%, the top 1% paid $84 billion more in revenue in 2007 than it did in 2000. Their share of the overall tax burden went up from 37 to 40%. For the bottom half of the country, their share of income tax revenue went down from 3.9 to 2.9% and they paid $6 billion less in revenue. So economic growth is so economic growth is important, and there's a lot of ways to get economic growth. Clinton benefited from the dot-com bubble as well, right? So there are a lot of things, and there was the private equity restructurings of the early 1990s that led to a lot of that growth in the 1990s. So yes, it would be great to have the Clinton economy, and if we had Clinton tax rates and we also had Clinton spending levels, I think Republicans would be just fine with that.
Okay, there is a lot to get to in that, and a lot of people want to jump in here, and they're going to when we come back.
And deductions are a big way in which the tax system really favors the well-off and well-to-do. And it's one of the reasons why people are so cynical about taxes. And so I say to conservatives who argue about making the system fair, that one of the best ways to do it is to deal with these deductions in the right way. But Simpson, Bowles, and others are wrong by saying this is the only way. The only way to do this, because there's not, we looked at this.
Just that kind of a plan.
I just want to be clear.
Well, I feel
Avik made the point that Romney supported something similar in deductions, and there could be nothing further from the truth. I think, just quickly, the fact is that the CAP plan has the 39.6 rate, and we're reforming deductions, but we do it in a way that protects middle-class families. What the Republican position today is, and Mitt Romney's position really, was to address deductions in a way that made middle-class families pay a lot more. And I think that's the irony of their position, which is essentially to protect high-income wage earners. They want to have more taxes on middle-class families. And I think the more people understand that's what this debate is really about. That kind of
that's absolutely not true. That's absolutely not true. So Mitt Romney explicitly promised that he would not raise taxes on the middle class, and if he needed to, he would be less aggressive on rate reduction in order to make sure that his plan paid for himself. He said that very clearly. He said that very clearly. So he was not raising taxes on the middle class.
All right, this conversation started to feel very October 2012. Avik, I want to ask you about this, because look, it's true you can go back and there have been, Obama, it's frequently cited by Republicans, voted against raising the debt ceiling in 2006. But he was never, Democrats were never in the past, and even Republicans in the past, were never trying to stage this kind of showdown where it was anything more than a symbolic vote, where they weren't using it as leverage for specific demands for deep spending cuts, for that sort of thing. When you hear Mitch McConnell talking like that, really, is this healthy for the system to be using the debt ceiling this way?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I understand the point that Congress has the power of the purse under our constitutional system, and it's their authority to raise the debt ceiling or not. But I'm also of the view that you can't have debt ceiling brinkmanship. It's really difficult for financial markets, very turbulent. We saw this the summer before last, and we would see it again. I mean, if we were to ever default on our debt, it would do immense damage to our borrowing ability. It would do immense damage to capital markets and faith in the stability of capital markets. So I'm not a fan of debt ceiling brinkmanship, and I would really advocate a way to do fiscal negotiations doesn't involve debt ceiling brinkmanship. That's my view.
Just to be clear, you know what the president's talking about is Mitch McConnell's idea from last year.
Right. The idea that Mitch McConnell filibustered on the floor. Mitch McConnell brought it up, and the Democrats said great idea.
But I do think I want to just build on what Avik said, which is that, you know, conservatives have been arguing about certainty in the markets and uncertainty from regulation. There is no greater uncertainty to markets, to business, to confidence than the idea that the United States could possibly default.
Avik Roy, former healthcare advisor to the Romney campaign, David Cay Johnston, author of The Fine Print, and MSNBC analyst Joan Walsh. Thanks for joining us.